Hi, this is a case study. This is actually part of a case study series for a large national financial institution where they were providing us sort of a challenge of the top questions that they found to be the most difficult to answer. So we got a number of questions that came in. And what I'm going to do is do each of these in a case study to show you how I went about setting it up and how I went about explaining the particular results in each of these. So in this first one, we have a situation where a client wanted to understand if it was worth refinancing a low interest rate fixed product to a lower interest rate ARM. Now, obviously, the real decision there is a function of timing, because if you're going from a 5% fixed to a 3% ARM, for example, you know there's going to be a savings. But how long will that savings persist, and what's the break even for the client, and does it really make sense financially? These are difficult questions to answer. So let's take a look at how we set this up. So we set it up as a refinance, and we put in here refinance from fixed to ARM. That just gave me a quick memory. We've got a make-believe name here for this particular client, Mr. and Mrs. Self-Directed, with $125,000 of income, 25% state and federal tax bracket. We're being conservative there, and put in the email address. So really what we need to do is set up the liabilities. They had some other liabilities, but for this case study, we're focusing on the specific question. They have a 30-year fix with a large bank at 5.5%. They had not refinanced because they planned to sell the house in about 5 years. So they've already missed a couple of years of the opportunity. But in this case, this particular bank financial institution wanted their credit specialists, their loan officers, to reach out to clients that they knew had low cost interest rates and try to generate some new business. But they kept getting people saying, well, I haven't refinanced because I'm planning to move in 3 years, or sell and when we retire in 4 years or 5 years. And they're like, how do you really communicate that that's a good idea? So in this case, we got a 5.5, about a $300,000 balance, and a $1,788.54 payment. So if I click on details, you can see $600,000 property value, primary residence, $315 was the original loan amount taken out in 2010, 5.5, 300. So we don't really, it's a refi, so I don't need to put in all this for a simple example in this case. So the important objectives here is a client wants to know if refinancing makes sense to take a 30-year fixed at 5.5 and move it to a 5-year ARM. The reason they weren't taking action again is that they plan to retire in 5 years. So in their mind, it's simply not worth refinancing to a lower rate when they plan to close and sell this house out. So our objective was to say, are they accurate? Are they correct? Or is this a false understanding? So to do that, we simply go to our Borrow tab, and we already have the current liabilities that are going to show up in here. We've got our $300,000 loan amount, our 5.5 pre-tax rate. They're paying about a 4.125 after-tax rate on that. The tax reduction is about $344. Their payment's $1,788.54, and as you can see, the payments remaining are about $321. But this is really irrelevant to them, right? Because in their mind, payments remaining are 50 or 60, and you have to keep that in mind if that's their time frame. So here we got a 5-year fixed, and we'll call this a refi. This is just our title. You get the same property value. We're putting in 5-year fixed from our product selection here. And I click on this, and this lets me set up all of my caps. This particular lender is using a 225 with a 3 margin on their LIBOR. So that means it's going to adjust after 61 months. First cap's going to be 2%, then adjust every 12 months at 2%. The life cap over the start rate is 5% over the start rate. They're using a margin of 3. Current index is around 0.675, 0.676, so I can change that. I've got my little indexes right here to help me see what's going on right now in the market. 1-year LIBOR. And per guideline, we want to always show this in a worst case scenario, meaning that whatever happens could be better for the client, but it couldn't be any worse. You have lots of different things you can simulate here, but we're going to always default to a worst case scenario. So we've got a low LTV. We're looking at 305 loan amount, so we're going to increase the loan by about $5,000 to cover all their closing costs, since we can do that easily. The bank wanted to look at a 3.25 as being their offering rate on the 5-year ARM. So we can already see the after-tax rate is going down dramatically and the payment is going down dramatically. So if I'm a lender and I've been in this business, I know intuitively that this is a good deal right away, but I do have closing costs that I have to overcome, and that's got to be taken out of my savings. And I've got a window of explanation where I know it's going to be better off for 5 years, but what if the client says we end up staying here for 6 or 7 years? Does this still make sense for them over time? That's why we take our process of saying, first, what's the impact on the closing cost? What's your cash impact? If you don't do anything, you have no cash out of pocket. Here I've got origination fees of about $1,525. Closing cost estimated to be $2,200. That's $3,725. That's all red. I've got green 5,000. That's positive cash coming in. That's coming in because the loan amount is $305 instead of $300,000. So we're providing some cash. So the first thing I'm going to ask is, or explain is, if we could do this transaction, you had no out of pocket and you actually walked away with about $1,275 in pocket, how would that feel? Does that seem like that would be something you're comfortable with? Because if they're not, I need to adjust this first to get it right. They say, yep, that sounds good. Second question is your monthly payment. You're spending $1,789 a month now. I can guarantee you for the next 5 years, you're going to spend $1,327. That's freeing up $462 a month. This is green and monthly savings. So you said your time frame was 5 years. If it's longer, we can look at another product. But do you feel like 5 years is still a good time frame? And if so, we can see that a big part of the savings is coming from the $462 a month in cash flow savings that's being applied. There's also another benefit which I always want to look at. Your current principal payment is $414. Your payment's going up to $501 for principal. So not only are you saving $462 a month in cash flow, but notice that instead of paying $414 a month, you're paying $501 here in principal because of that lower rate. So you're really getting about another $70, $80 a month in additional principal, taking this payment savings up to well over $500. Now, you could figure this out with a calculator and express it. And again, the challenge with these particular case studies was, how do we easily explain this to the client? So this is where we really shine here on the wealth impact, because what we're going to be able to do now is come in here and very easily explain that if you were to pay $1,788.54 a month, which is your old payment, and you were to continue to do that going forward with the new payment, because that's the best way to compare apples to apples, how much better are you after 5 years? And we'll assume 2% property appreciation rate, but I can make that 0. I like to clean up case studies. Let's just assume the property appreciation rate is 0 and the savings rate 0, because those are variables that if I can take them out for making my point, I'd rather do that. And if the client wants to assume certain things, we can add those back in. And I don't have to look at all the math here. I can go right to my key number. Just like up here, my key number is 462. That's the monthly savings. Here, my key number is my net cash at closing. And here, my key number is the actual wealth impact over 5 years. That's a green number, $28,074. So I can ask the client and say, so if I had $1,200 in your pocket, you were saving $462 a month in real cash flow, even more with your principal, and you knew at the end of 5 years you were better off by $28,074. Is that something that would be worth your time? Now, this is a tip that I always share in our classes. If you take 28,074 and divide it by 5, another way to communicate that is that's $5,614 a year tax-free that you're saving. To make this even realer, let's divide it by 12. That's $467.09 a month tax-free that you're going to be saving over the next 5 years. For you to save an extra $467.90 a month tax-free, you'd have to go out and, to have that much left over to save, you'd have to go out in a 25% tax bracket. So I say times 1.25, because remember, you need to make $584 to have that $497 left over to be able to invest. So on a pre-tax basis, this is like you going out and earning an extra $584 per month. So the other thing we can look at here is a time frame. What if they said, yeah, but I'm a little worried. What if we stay 7 years? I simply go to the 7-year time frame. You're still saving $25,688, even with this issue of having a higher payment on a monthly basis. So if we're going to create a presentation for the client, what might we create? We simply go to the Present tab. What I want to present to the client is the cover and the introduction. I want to do the 2-page summary, which gives me my, my charts and graphs, which is going to help to communicate the ARMs. I also want to include the ARM details. I'm going to leave the AM tables off for now. So this is a nice setup for this kind of a conversation. When I click Preview Client Presentation, this is going to bring in my, my presentation for this particular client. And I look at the introduction and the summary payment stage. And again, if I was presenting this to the client, I can show your loan amounts going from $300,000 to $305,000, but we're reducing your monthly payment from $1,789 to $1,327. We're taking your interest as a percent of total payments from 73% to 43%. If you look at this over the next 5 years, you're going to spend $107,000 in both of these scenarios, because we're going to assume that you're making the same payment, because that's the easiest way for us to compare the benefits of this scenario. And when I look at this and I look at the closing cost at $37.25 out of pocket that you're spending, your net savings is going to be $28,074 over that same time period. One way I can kind of explain these benefits here is when I look at your current liabilities, this black line is what you're going to continue to pay until the loan is paid off. If you're going out 30 years, I wouldn't recommend this at all. But given that your time frame is 5 years, that payment's 5 years, and it's going to start adjusting. And you can see that max minimum payments crossing over at about the 7th year here. More importantly, is if they decide to stay in this house for a long period of time, they're still not worse off until about the 11th year. And that's where this positive savings becomes negative. That's why, again, I wouldn't do this for 30 years, and you're communicating to the client, that would be a $140,000 mistake based on a worst case scenario. If your time frame is really 5 years, you're better off by $28,000. We reached that right around the 6th year. And if you look out and go out over time period, even if you change your mind, you're there for 8 or 9 years, you're still better off financially than doing what you're doing today. And I can show you the ARM details here so you see that you've got that lower payment of $13.27 for 5 years, and the 6th year, 16, and the 7th year. So it's not until that 7th year that your payment's getting above what you're paying today. So that's how I could go about answering that question. Is this better off for you? I can answer that just really on this one page here and say, yep. If you look at the break even, which is 7 months, and you look at your time frame of 5 years, you're much better off going with an ARM than staying with that current fixed rate product that you have today.